Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Ronan Murphy and I'm joined this week by Duncan Castles. Great to have you back, Duncan.
Great to be back on the podcast, Ronan, with football's most charming podcast presenter.
Yeah, you have to say that, and it's mainly because my wife has been paying you to say that on a regular basis.
It's not arrived in my account yet. Maybe you could just nudge her on that?
Yeah, I'll have to follow up. I think there's some problem with the accounting at the moment. Maybe you've put the wrong number on the invoice, perhaps. So maybe she's good at not paying when she doesn't have to. On to more serious business, actual business. We have some news on a man who's proven himself to be perhaps the most accomplished sports director in world football over the last decade. So you have some interesting news on Luis Campos.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating because we're talking about an era where sports directors, football directors have become more prominent, more important than ever before in football. I mean, you can look just, for example, at the takeovers, the two biggest takeovers in history of Chelsea and Manchester United. And both of the new ownership groups, not just hiring new football directors, but hiring multiple new football directors, as many as 4 working simultaneously for them, and dismissing or parting company with at least one of them in each of those clubs' cases inside a year. So it's a central position, and I think this is it's a really interesting period of time in football because you have Luis Campos, who I think has demonstrated himself, as you say, to be one of the most accomplished in his field, coming to the end of a 3-year contract at Paris Saint-Germain. He joined the club in 2022 as football advisor, as a external football advisor whose primary focus was on Paris Saint-Germain. I think it's fair to say he's completely overhauled the club in that time, gone from this sort of bloated, star-centric model that Nasser Al-Khelaifi believed would, after the signing of Lionel Messi, actually gave a press conference in which he talked about how they would not only have to win everything now, he wanted to see by what margin they could win everything. There was an expectation that adding Messi to Neymar, to Kylian Mbappe and Sergio Ramos would guarantee success at the top level. What they managed to do was demonstrate the exact opposite. That if you put too many superstars in a team, if you have too many players who don't want to run without the ball, and Messi and Neymar were definitely in that camp, you end up getting beaten at Champions League level. You can win the French title, although interestingly, PSG haven't won the French title every year. They've been the biggest spenders, and Luis Campos, as we'll talk about later, was responsible for building the teams, Lille and Monaco, that took the title off them. But you're not going to win in the Champions League. Campos came in. He has radically reduced their wage bill. He's changed the age profile of the squad. He's changed the technical ability of the squad, the adaptability of the squad. He's made them a team that is suited to modern football in the space of 2.5 seasons, winning the French title both years. Very much on course to win the French title again. They're currently 13 points clear of Marseille, and they've made it to the Champions League knockout rounds. They have this renewal of the squad has been accelerated again in recent weeks. Campos has signed Vitinha, one of their key central midfielders, to a new contract till 2029. Nuno Mendes, who was of interest to Manchester United, had been approached by Ruben Amorim to leave PSG, come Manchester United, until it became clear he would cost too much money. And Achraf Hakimi, all extended to 2029. And a first professional contract for Ibrahim Mbaye, a 17-year-old forward who some people will tell you is likely to be one of the best French players in the future. They've also given Luis Enrique, the coach, a new contract until 2027. They're in such a good place that I'm told that they would have made a profit this year after years and years of losses if it wasn't for Kylian Mbappe taking legal action over the financial terms of his exit from the club. So Campos has, I think, done exceptionally good work there. Paris Saint-Germain want him to stay. They've been in negotiations over a new contract for several months now. But what I'm told is that those negotiations have not progressed in the fashion that Luis Campos would like. And that he's been disappointed that, having done all of this work, having, as he feels, fulfilled his side of the bargain in terms of what was expected of him coming into Paris Saint-Germain, that there hasn't been a commitment to him on the terms that he wants to carry on at the club. Other football clubs, other football projects are aware of this. They're aware, as anyone is, that his contract ends at the end of this season. There have been, I'm told, approaches to him for several months now. And Campos, I understand, is now taking those approaches seriously. He is opening the door to moving elsewhere at the end of this season because Paris Saint-Germain have failed to conclude terms with him, and we're less than 4 months away from the end of that contract. We can talk a bit about some of the proposals that have been presented to him and why he would be taking them seriously. First of those is an approach by Chelsea, by the Clearlakecapital ownership group, who would like him to come in as a head of football, not simply at Chelsea Football Club, but as a head of football for the entire multi-club football group that they've started to build by buying RC Strasbourg in France, and want to extend and are actively planning to extend at present. They have approached Campos. I'm told there have been 2 meetings, the most recent of which took place in Monaco, to assess whether he'd be interested in coming to work for them, heading up the multi-club group, advising them on their entire football strategy, helping them recruit more intelligently than they have done so far. And in many ways, I think you can see the attraction, because what Campos has specialised in during his career is identifying young talents and bringing them to clubs and placing them in environments where they develop into some of the best footballers in the game, or develop into players who can be traded on for high values. And that's exactly what the Chelsea model is, but not really what they've managed to implement particularly effectively so far. I'm told that Campos is open to that idea. He's interested in what's been happening in European football generally, with this model of having a head of football or a chief executive of football in multi-club ownership groups. So you look at Fenway Sports Group, the owners of Liverpool, and their appointment or reappointment of Michael Edwards as chief executive of football last summer after Jurgen Klopp left. You can also look at Jurgen Klopp himself going to the Red Bull Group to be head of football for their clubs in Brazil, Germany, Austria, and the United States. You have another example with Evangelos Marinakis, Nottingham Forest and Olympiacos owner, who also has the Portuguese club Rio Ave, who took Edu from Arsenal to fulfil a similar head of football role across the 3 clubs. And then at Bournemouth, highly successful in the Premier League at the moment, hiring Thiago Pinto as president of football operations across Bournemouth, Lorient, A-League leaders, Auckland are part of the group, and they also own 25% of Hibs. And they're in the process of purchasing a Liga Portugal club, Moreirense, at the moment. So that is one option for Campos. Ronan, what would your thoughts be on Campos taking over at the Chelsea group? And what do you think he could add to the recruitment and on-field model there?
Yeah, I think if you look at his career so far, the way he's kind of come through at Lille and at Monaco, the players he's brought in and Radamel Falcao would be one maybe familiar to Chelsea fans, but some of the players that he's brought in, perhaps for affordable fees to sell on, it's like you said, can turn clubs to be very profitable clubs. He can help make a lot of money on the transfer market, and he would have with PSG this season. We probably would have had it, but he's brought in Victor Osimhen, Rafa Leao, even Gabriel, who's now at Arsenal. He brought these players through at Lille, and some of the players he's brought through at PSG, similarly, like Vitinha, who he says after signing a new contract, Fabian Ruiz, even Bradley Barcola, some of these younger guys, they're not just players for the future, they're players for now at the clubs they are. And what we've seen from Chelsea in the summer and over the last year or so is some of the players they've brought in obviously have been players with a long-term kind of view of the player, but they haven't been able to get into the first team. There's having to be loaned out, whereas if he was able to take over at kind of even a higher level at Chelsea and be able to kind of organise how these players are progressing through the affiliate clubs with loan moves and things like that, that we perhaps would see Chelsea would not be kind of the same club they are at now, whereas they have a lot of players, but they don't seem to know what to do with them. And we've seen that Campos in the past, the players he brought in kind of fit the club. They fit the club now and in the future, and they could be profitable players. So it seems obviously it will be a perfect appointment for Chelsea or the football group above that to bring in someone like him who can kind of orchestrate everything for them and make profits on these players, but also have success on the pitch, because wherever he's gone so far, he's had success on the pitch. And like you said, he was the man who kind of stopped PSG winning, and now if you look at PSG this season, and they've given Luis Enrique that new contract, but if you look at the way PSG are playing, especially since the start of 2025, they look like the best team in Europe at the moment. Maybe only Liverpool can come close to them at the moment. So this is probably where Chelsea want to position themselves in the long term, in the medium term, even in the short term. This is where Chelsea need to see themselves, and they will be crazy not to consider someone like Luis Campos.
Yeah, I think there was a statistic the other day. One of the PSG lineups, it was the third youngest team of all the clubs in the big five leagues in Europe. So, as you say, you've got a team that's performing on the pitch now, but has years of development ahead of them and years to work together and build together. And look, you highlighted what Campos did at Monaco, at Lille. I think the figures are over €1 billion in transfer fees raised just from sales in those two clubs. Players, the list of star players is incredible that he brought into the club. Kylian Mbappe, obviously the prime example, eventually sold for €180 million transfer fee, which remains the second highest fee ever achieved for a footballer. You've got Bernardo Silva, Fabinho, Benjamin Mendy, Thomas Lemar all went for big transfer fees from that Monaco side. Leo, Victor Osimhen, Gabriel Magalhaes, you mentioned, to Arsenal. Nicolas Pepe for 80 million to Arsenal. Leo clearly got the better of that deal. Sven Botman to Newcastle, 37 million. And Raphael Leão, who I think there's a good chance we'll see go for a high fee this coming summer. But I think also you focus on something important here. When he's doing that recruitment, and this is something Chelsea haven't achieved, when he's been doing that recruitment, it's always within the context of placing them in a functioning team that will win quickly, to get them in an environment to develop the players in surroundings where they can succeed. Because if you don't have that, then the careers can go off track, and you certainly don't access, if you're dealing at it from a purely financial point of view, which some owners want to do, you don't have access to maximizing value. So it's that ability to both identify talent very early on, often before analytics show that these guys are the players that the majority of clubs will be chasing, identifying the talent early on and building an environment around them where they can succeed, which is proven by Monaco winning the French title in 2016-17 to PSG, who had a much, much bigger budget, and Leo winning in 2021, again, taking the title off PSG, who had a much greater budget. And I think that's where one of the other approaches, which is one we FootballTransfers broke in November, there was the interest from Arsenal. So this is the other big Premier League club that are looking to see whether they can take this window of opportunity that's coming with Campos' contract expiring and get him to the Premier League. I think that's where Arsenal are looking. Now, I'm told that's being driven by Mikel Arteta. Arteta wants to be able to choose the replacement for Edu. He feels that he needs someone to help around the team, around recruitment, around organisational elements at the training ground, around practices with medical science, etc., training policies, the gamut of things that Campos has also dealt with in his career. He wants someone who can come in with the expertise to turn a team that have been contenders for the Premier League into actual winners for the Premier League. The relationship, I understand, is quite a long-standing one. In fact, Arteta was a candidate for the PSG job. Was one of the individuals that Campos approached to take the PSG job when he first came in to the Paris club. I think the difficulty there is going to be that this is being driven by Arteta. And why is that a problem? I think because Arteta doesn't have the sign-off on payments for this. So if it comes down to a battle of finances, how much are Paris Saint-Germain, Qatar and Paris Saint-Germain prepared to pay Campos to stay on when they know how good he is? And the briefing I have from Paris Saint-Germain is that they're calm about this situation, that they do want him to stay, that they like the way that Enrique, Nasser Al-Khalifi and Campos are working together, and they feel that they can come to a resolution on the contract. So they think it will be okay in the end, but they clearly have got more financial power than Arsenal do. And Chelsea, as has been demonstrated, when they want an individual, they're ready to go to the top level of the market to sign that individual. So Arsenal and Chelsea, the two Premier League clubs that are pushing. And then there's another proposal that Campos has, which is completely different and actually fascinating in what it says about global football at the moment, in that he's been asked, I'm told, to take over the Saudi Arabian national team, not obviously as coach, but as the project director for the Saudi Arabian national team over the next 10 years as they prepare for the 2034 World Cup that they will host in Asia. And what they want him to do is to build a national team that can replicate or surpass what South Korea achieved hosting Asia's first World Cup in 2002 when they made the semi-finals of the tournament. I've got a bit of detail about the kind of outline plan for how Campos has proposed getting the maximum out of the massive resource that Saudi Arabia are prepared to put into this World Cup and prepared to put into their national team. And what he's suggesting is that they begin by focusing on youth, that they start off with an extensive scouting program on the underage groups. And by underage, we're talking here under 12s to under 15s. And then they make a selection of the most talented players they can find from those teenagers, or some of them not even teenagers yet. Those players will then be brought together into a new elite academy, which will be furnished with the best development coaches they can hire, with the idea of creating a style of play for the Saudi Arabian national team that can be successful at the World Cup and also fits the history of the country, and it is the strongest, probably most passionate football nation in Asia. Then once they've got this academy together, the idea would be to build a team of teenagers who've come through the academy, which would play in the Saudiproleague. So they become one of the competing teams in the Saudiproleague on an indefinite basis in order to accelerate their development and have them working on a weekly, on a daily basis as a team, which actually reminds me of a bit it's like a hyper-developed version of what Gus Hiddink did with the South Korea national team to get them to that semi-final in 2002, and that he told the Korean Football Association that he wanted as much access to the players as possible and was allowed to take senior players, keep them in training camps with the national team, take them away from their club sides. The vast majority of Korean players were based in Korea at that time, and play as many games as possible. And he turned it into a club environment. And I think a lot of their success at that World Cup was to do with the fact that they spent so much time together, so much time getting to know each other, and so much time developing tactical plans. This is taking it to a different level altogether, in that you'd be building a team kind of 9 years ahead of the tournament, with a huge amount more capital and resource, and a specific plan to keep that team running in the domestic league and potentially Asian Champions League before you build it into the national team per se. You can imagine that that offer from Saudi Arabia is a very lucrative one. Guidance I have is that it is for 20 million euros a year net. So you can tell from that Saudi Arabians seem quite impressed by Campos's ideas and his track record in the game as well.
Yeah, and he gave a quote, I think it was nearly a decade ago, but if you look at what Saudi Arabia are planning, they're planning a decade in the future. But yeah, he said before that, I don't want to appear arrogant, but I assure you I will create other masterpieces like this in my career. That was when he was at Monaco. That he said that, but this looks like it could be his greatest masterpiece if he was to kind of turn Saudi Arabia into a footballing powerhouse that can compete at the World Cup. And I suppose they're right to be looking this far in the future. Obviously they're hosting it, so they know they're going to be hosting it, but this is where you lay in the groundwork. And we've seen it, like you said, with Korea. It's worked before. If you even look back to USA 94, when they were hosting the World Cup, the national team, the US men's national team, kind of worked like a club itself. There was some of the players, Thomas Dooley, who was a German-born player that was US eligible through his father. He ended up kind of leaving the Bundesliga for the bones of a year before playing in the World Cup, just to play in an enormous amount of friendlies for the USA before the World Cup. And it stood to them because it wasn't necessarily a huge football culture or soccer culture in the US before that. It worked for them, kind of making the national team a club team, but this is kind of that to an even bigger level, that this club team is going to compete in the top league. And if it does have the best young players in it, that is a fantastic way to develop the talent in the league, because we've seen superstar names sign for the Saudiproleague, but we don't really hear too much of local names. But if they assess them at this young, they have one of the best minds in football in the world kind of overseeing it. There's no reason to think why it wouldn't be a success, and it wouldn't be Luis Campos's next masterpiece.
Yeah, as you say, multiple masterpieces, Monaco, Leo, I think one in the making at Paris Saint-Germain. It's going to be fascinating to see how this battle plays out for his services and where he decides whether he wants to stay at Paris Saint-Germain and see them win the Champions League, be there present when it happens. Whether Paris Saint-Germain will respond with the offer required to keep him at the club, or whether he moves to the Premier League, which I know is somewhere he has talked about being interested in working in the past, or goes in this completely different route of becoming the technical director for the most affluent football federation on the planet.
Yeah, whatever happens, you feel that he will be a success wherever he goes, because that's what he's proven so far. Multiple teams, and even when he was a coach, he upset the great Jose Mourinho back in his coaching days. So I can see why Arteta is interested in him and interested in him being involved very closely with the club, because this is someone who was a footballer, who was a coach, and now has kind of worked at every level, has worked his way up kind of if you were in an office job, you were working in from the mailroom to become the CEO sort of approach. So this is a man who lives, breathes, and sleeps football. So someone else maybe who perhaps should have hired Luis Campos instead of Dave Brailsford and Dan Ashworth was Manchester United, and maybe they mightn't be in the kind of amount of trouble that they're in at the moment. And they had, just this week, they have had an announcement of a transformation plan to strengthen financial sustainability and modernise its operating structure, which sounds a bit like some of the boring lectures I was at in college. So I doubt that some of the staff were too impressed hearing that, or definitely not impressed by some of the contents that would have been in it.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned Campos in the context of Manchester United, because he is a resident of Monaco, and Manchester United's one of their owners, not the majority owner, but the guy who calls the shots at the moment, Jim Ratcliffe, is also a resident of Monaco, famously or infamously, depending on your point of view. And I believe has had a few conversations with Campos in the past, but didn't in the end try to hire him. Chose to go for Dave Brailsford as the kind of mastermind of the transformation of Manchester United into a team that's supposed to win its 21st, I think, English title. Was it Mission 21 is one of Dave Brailsford's innovations that he launched in autumn last year to build for their 21st league title as part of Project 150 to mark their 150th anniversary in 2028, suggesting that's the deadline for them to get there. They've only really gone backwards since they went for Brailsford, since Ratcliffe came into the club. And it now seems that there's an obsession with cutting costs, which I think is, look, if you look at Ratcliffe's behaviour in his other businesses, how he made his money in the petrochemical industry, one of the things he's always done is cut costs. And you see with what they're doing here, because this is their second round of redundancies in the space of 7 months. They announced 250 redundancies last year, announcing this transformation plan on Monday. They said by email, by the way, and not in the all-staff meeting in which Chief Executive OmarBerrada talked about the transformation plan in person to the staff. By email, they were told to be expected between 150 and 200 more redundancies. This time, a lot more on the football department side of the club. If all of those redundancies happen, if they go to 450, that would amount to a 40% reduction of staff from the 1,140 employees they had at the end of the last season, which was the highest in the Premier League. But they're really, Berrada talked about this and saying, we have a responsibility to put Manchester United in the strongest position to win across men's, women's and academy teams. We have lost money for the past 5 consecutive years. This cannot continue. Our 2 main priorities as a club are delivering success on the pitch for our fans and improving our facilities. We cannot invest in these objectives if we're continuously losing money. Now, they're going down to pretty fine detail in some of their savings here, in that they have ended free hot meals for staff, closing the canteen at Old Trafford. They'll be replaced with fruit bowls. Estimated saving of over £1 million a year, according to United. The training ground staff will also have their hot meals, or the same quality of hot meals that the players and technical staff receive at present, removed from them once the upgrade at Carrington has taken place, and they're going to get a soup and roll at the training ground instead, and be asked to pay if they want anything more than that. Manchester United's guidance on this is that they're moving staff from Old Trafford to Carrington in order to shift the club's centre of gravity towards its football activities and create a more unified, streamlined workforce, benefiting from the modernised facilities at the training ground. And it's part of an ongoing effort to manage their football costs more efficiently, with the ultimate objective of maximising investment in football, but doing it more effectively than in the past. This all comes against a context of undoubtedly poor financials. The losses of the club announced to the stock market over the last 5 years are £373 million. The last quarter, the revenue went down by 12%. They had debts to financial institutions of 731 million. Now, on top of that, they have another 413, almost 414 million of unpaid transfer fees, i.e. transfer fees and costs, such as signing on fees that are paid across various seasons, and agents' fees that are paid across various seasons that are due to be paid on players they've already signed. So that's over £1 billion of debt there. But they're bringing quite a lot of this upon themselves, I think, with their football decisions, in that in those last set of second quarter accounts, there was £14.5 million of exceptional costs around the sacking of Erik ten Hag and his assistants, and a £4.1 million cost of hiring and then dismissing Dan Ashworth as sporting director. I think the argument they're making that they have to stop the losses and they can't invest properly in the football team until they've done that is kind of a bit disingenuous, in that a lot of the new investment and new spending that's been made under Ratcliffe has been on the training ground, £50 million on that, and on preparing for a rebuild of Old Trafford, which, depending on how much money they get from the government to assist with that, could cost well over £1 billion. But it has to be noted that these training ground costs and stadium costs don't count towards PSR and financial fair play calculations. So they're not actually losses that need to be stemmed immediately in order to develop the football team. And it also includes a period where Manchester United went through COVID, and to their great credit, were probably the most generous of all the Premier League football clubs in terms of how they kept employees under contract, kept paying freelance employees such as stadium stewards when they were not obliged to, and put a large amount of their money into supporting the local community and NHS efforts to handle COVID. So I think it's a little bit deceptive to highlight all of these losses, not underline the context, and also not explicitly recognise that a big part of their struggles at the moment are because of the bad decisions Ratcliffe and the people he has hired have made in the transfer market, in keeping Ten Hag on, in taking Ruben Amorim at the wrong time when they need to then rebuild the squad for a second time in the space of 6 months, and dropping down the table as a result of that. I don't think there's almost zero chance they qualify for the Champions League this year. They're currently 15th. Their worst ever Premier League position is 8th. Each Premier League finish in itself costs around £3 million. So, you know, there's a chunk of money, probably £30 million, if they end up 15th, just being lost on their Premier League place, just being lost on their on-field performance. And instead of concentrating on that, they're concentrating on cutting staff, with all the ramifications that has for the mood in the camp and for the environment in which his new coach and the players have to work in.
Yeah, so the difference between a draw and a win could be the difference in the table at the end of the season, and that could be the difference of 3 million, and that could be a lot of canteen food or staff wages, etc. So
3 years of canteen food, yes.
yeah. It must be very frustrating for some of the staff at the moment working there, because like they don't necessarily know what their future is, because there's been a round of redundancies, more redundancies. It is probably not the best environment on the pitch, as we see, as fans will see week in, week out. They're not performing on the pitch, but when you know your job could be under threat, it's not the best place to be. I know, obviously, they deserve credit for keeping the staff paid and keeping the staff on during the COVID time, because we know other clubs kind of were looking to furlough staff and let staff go and stuff like that. And that was great to see, but that was then and this is now, and it's fine looking back 5 years ago. But
that was the Glazers. This is INEOS.
Yeah, this is a different, and this is a different ball game completely. And INEOS they're cutting them back. It's not just Man United; they're cutting back in sport across the board, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. It's another part of context that's important here, is that it isn't INEOS just, as you say, going after Manchester United's bottom line. It's INEOS which has invested heavily in sport in general in the past decade, cutting back across almost all their divisions. There was a big story earlier this month that they were being sued by New Zealand Rugby because they had cancelled their contract with to sponsor the All Blacks. They've been the All Blacks official performance partner since 2021. And statement from New Zealand Rugby about them breaching their sponsorship agreement. Most recently, INEOS failed to pay the first instalment of the 2025 sponsorship fee, confirming its decision to exit our 6-year agreement. And a fascinating response by INEOS in a public statement as to why they had done that, saying, trading conditions for our European businesses have been severely impacted by high energy costs and extreme carbon taxes, along with much of the chemical industry in Europe, which is struggling or shutting down. We are witnessing the deindustrialization of Europe. As a result, we had to implement cost-saving measures across the business. In terms of the other sports deals, the CEO of their cycling team has been on record saying that INEOS does not want to spend more money on the team, and the team is actively looking for a new co-title sponsor to take up the slack left by INEOS. They have split with Ben Ainsley, his America's Cup team, who they'd bankrolled for several years, with Ainsley threatening legal action. And in the INEOS business generally, just a few days ago, 2 of the credit rating agencies downgraded INEOS's debt, which is forecast to reach almost 12 billion euros this year, which is over 5 times their annual earnings, to negative. So the credit ratings also having doubts about INEOS's business in general. So you have, I think, a pretty concerning environment in general if you're a Manchester United supporter who had waited so long for the Glazers to go. You get Ratcliffe coming in, you get this promise to put $300 million of additional investment into the team, all of which has been done. New shares have been bought. Investment mainly going towards infrastructure projects at present. You have him talking about how it's not a financial project. He wasn't getting involved in football to make money. He was doing it because it was his club and he wanted to be a success in football. But you see him so rapidly emulating what he's done in his other non-sports businesses in terms of looking at cost-cutting exercises on the bottom line to try and turn the football business around, while the main source of his wealth is, by his company's own admission, struggling because of, well, they blame it, energy costs and carbon taxes. It makes you wonder what would happen if the Glazers were to come to Ratcliffe now and say to him, you came to us originally trying to buy the club in full. We'd quite like to sell you all in full. Will you give us the same price you paid to us a little bit over a year ago. Would you be prepared to buy the whole thing now? Because they actually have, in the terms of that share agreement, they're allowed to start talking to other parties in a few months' time. 18 months after the initial transaction, they can talk to anyone else who would be interested in buying Manchester United with the prospect of selling their shares and dragging along Ratcliffe shares into the deal if they should choose to do so. Whether they'd be able to get the same asking price as Ratcliffe delivered for them, different question altogether.
Yeah, and if you're trying to buy a successful football team, the successful football team you'd be trying to buy would not be Manchester United at the moment. That's hugely popular and a hugely historic football team, but success on the pitch does not look in the near future for them, given the investments they've made around players, the amount of money that they've spent. But like you said, Ratcliffe's $300 million promise, that's been largely invested in infrastructure, and obviously the club needs that for long term. We know all the problems that Old Trafford had, the leaky roof, etc. And the developing in academy is always the way to go. Improving your training ground and stuff like that is going to work out well in the long run. But in the short run, it's the results on the pitch is a lot of what people care about, and they're not getting those at the moment. And if it does come to the kind of case where the Glazers do want to sell to somebody else, I don't think they will get the same amount of money that Jim Ratcliffe paid 12 months ago.
Look, it's still one of the great assets in world sports if it can be run properly. So it depends, as always in these situations, it depends what buyer's prepared to pay. But I think what's clear is a lot of the decisions that Ratcliffe has taken have not worked so far. In many ways, they've backfired. And this latest round of redundancies is not going to help things. One of the things I understand is that Dan Ashworth opposed redundancies within the football department. He believed that was a bad thing for the club to be doing because it would affect the first team. And they're now engaging in redundancies within the football department. You can imagine what the mood is like within the camp. You can imagine what the doubts are within the camp, given that Ruben Amorim's come in, 22 matches in charge, won just 10 of them, drawn 3, lost 9. Fortunate to still be in the FA Cup. Fortunate to get away from Everton with a draw at the weekend, courtesy of a utterly bizarre VAR decision. And there are question marks being asked by multiple people in football and people at Manchester United about why, for example, OmarBerrada, who was primarily a financial expert and a deal maker at Manchester City, has come in as chief executive, and he has been the one driving the football side of the club in the sense of he is the one who drove the recruitment of Ruben Amorim. Why have multiple specialists hired and then use someone who has been successful in football as a business, as an industry, but whose success in the industry hasn't been on, for one thing, the dimension of hiring a coach, because he's never hired a coach before. So there are lots of question marks there, and I don't think you get over these things easily. And even Amorim has talked, I think, a couple of times now about the impact of redundancies at the club and saying people are losing job. Of course, it's hard to have that feeling of people safe in their job, and it affects the environment. We cannot ignore, we acknowledge that problem. And I want to say that the responsibility is the first team. I think he's being overgenerous there. The responsibility is not primarily the first team. They have a responsibility. The responsibility is on the people who are directing the club. And a lot of people in football are asking questions about whether they really know what they're doing at the moment.
Yeah, and it's not good when your first team coach is being asked about these things in press conferences. That is something that shouldn't be asked of your manager, your first team, your head coach, because they should be asked about footballing matters and not the redundancies, the cuts behind the scenes. That should be secondary. They shouldn't be wrapped up in this, but everything at Manchester United at the moment is all kind of tied together, and it's all one big mess, I suppose, is the best way of putting it.
Yeah, I imagine someone like Amorim would be thinking it'd probably be quite a nice time for someone in the hierarchy to do a sit-down interview or at least a press conference, and answer some of the questions on where the club are and what the strategy is and why they're acting in this manner, and saying that they have to make these redundancies in order to make themselves successful on the pitch again. Because I don't think there's necessarily a straight line you can draw between dismissing staff off the field and success on the pitch.
No, and we'll have to see for the next weeks and months and even years how it will play out, because the kind of effects of this will be seen for a long time at Manchester United and Old Trafford. So now we come to our hero and villain part of the week, and I think the villain this week might have been Duncan on Twitter, winding up a lot of football fans about some controversial VAR decisions. But before we get onto that, I'll pick the hero, and for my hero this week, I'm going for Mo Salah, because what a player he is at the moment, and he has put the Christmas curse to bed with his form since the turn of the year. He just seems to be getting better and better, and this is a player at the peak of his powers. He's one of the best players to watch in the world at the moment. He is single-handedly winning some games for Liverpool. It's a joy to watch him, and also it's kind of sad to think that maybe he won't be in the Premier League next season, because we don't know what's happening for the future. But for now, I'm greatly enjoying Mo Salah, and he's my hero this week.
You didn't enjoy my analysis of what was going on with yet another Premier League VAR disaster at Everton, when they failed to show the one angle which clearly demonstrates that a penalty had taken place, that De Ligt was pulling the shirt, not with one hand but with both hands of Ashley Young. That's
kind of my defending when I play 5-a-side or 7-a-side. So I'm all for the defender in this instance.
Well, villain of the week, it follows on from the last section. I'm going to go for the Elon Musk of English football, Jim Ratcliffe, for his part in going for probably not very logical financial cuts in a major operation, which he doesn't really seem to have the experience to know what the best changes to make to are.
Yeah, I will not add more fuel to that fire, because I think we've said all we can about Jim Ratcliffe, and if we continue to complain about him, we could be here forever. And I know a lot of our listeners like a short, sweet episode, so we will maybe finish up there. You've been listening to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you like what you heard, spread the word. Please follow, share and rate us. You can message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter and Blue Sky address is at TransfersCast. Duncan is on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. I'm on Twitter at SwearNotPaul and on Blue Sky at Ronan Murphy. Our production is by Mark Cauffield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music by Mark Cauffield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. He and McCarry, who left us and was alone for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. 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 Where everyone's gonna go.